My name is Amelia Roth. Learned very early that silence made people careless. She had perfected it by the age of 12, sitting at the far end of polished tables where men twice her age discussed money, as if it were oxygen, invisible yet essential, something only they could control. Now at 29, she sat in the same posture inside the Roth International boardroom on the 42nd floor of a glass tower overlooking Midtown Manhattan, her spine straight, her expression unreadable, a leather-bound notebook open in front of her. The skyline behind her looked confident, arrogant even, as if it too believed the Roth name was untouchable. Amelia wore no power suit, no aggressive colors. Soft gray, clean lines. The kind of outfit that invited underestimation. She had learned that lesson from her mother, long before the woman died quietly while the men in the family were busy expanding empires. Roth International had been built by her grandfather with post-war grit, scaled by her father with conservative brilliance, and was now being reimagined, as her sister liked to say, with reckless ambition. Amelia was officially listed as a minority shareholder and strategic observer, a title that sounded decorative enough to keep her out of real conversation. Unofficially, she was the reason 3 of their most profitable acquisitions in the last 5 years hadn't collapsed under regulatory pressure or data miscalculations. She never took credit. She never corrected anyone. She took notes. Across the table, her older sister, Vanessa Roth, stood in front of a wall-sized screen, clicking through slides filled with aggressive growth curves and glowing projections. Vanessa was everything Amelia was not: loud where Amelia was quiet, radiant where Amelia was reserved, adored where Amelia was tolerated. She wore confidence like a tailored jacket, smiling as she spoke about overseas expansion, about leveraged capital, about how Roth International needed to move faster or risk becoming irrelevant. Every few minutes, she glanced at their father, Richard Roth, the patriarch, the final word, the man whose approval still shaped the room's temperature. Amelia wrote calmly while Vanessa spoke quickly. When one of the external directors asked about risk exposure in the Southeast Asian expansion, specifically liquidity dependencies, Vanessa waved it off with a laugh. "We've accounted for all of that. This is why we hire professionals," she said, then turned her head slightly, eyes flicking toward Amelia. The smile sharpened. "Some of us still prefer to play with side projects." A few people chuckled. Amelia didn't look up. Then Vanessa said it clearly, deliberately, her voice light but pointed. "Stick to your little side jobs, Amelia. Let the real business stay with the professionals." There it was. Clean, surgical. Amelia's pen paused for exactly half a second, then continued moving. Richard Roth nodded slowly, his hands folded on the table. "Your sister is right," he said, not unkindly, which somehow made it worse. "Observation is valuable, but execution requires experience. Leave the business to professionals." Not a single person defended her. Not one. Amelia felt nothing on her face. Inside, she felt clarity. She had spent years building a parallel world quietly, legally, invisibly. While Vanessa chased headlines and applause, Amelia studied data, shadow markets, capital flow behaviors. She had never asked to be trusted. She had built systems that didn't require trust at all. Her side jobs were advisory roles, minority stakes, silent partnerships routed through firms that never carried the Roth name. One of those firms managed a private investment vehicle that, coincidentally, held $85 million of strategic funding backing Vanessa's prized expansion. Vanessa didn't know that. Richard didn't either. The board meeting moved on. Applause followed. Schedules were discussed. Coffee was poured. Amelia closed her notebook as people stood and conversations fractured into smaller clusters. Amelia slipped her phone from her bag and typed with calm precision, her thumb steady, her breathing even. "With immediate effect, withdraw all $85 million in committed capital from Roth Southeast expansion. Trigger clause $7 billion. No delays, no negotiations." She hit send. The message went to Daniel Klein, her investment director, a man who didn't ask why when Amelia made decisions like this. He trusted patterns. And Amelia had never been wrong. She stood, nodded politely to no one in particular, and left the boardroom before anyone noticed. The elevator ride down was silent except for the soft hum of descent. Amelia watched her reflection in the mirrored walls, composed, forgettable, exactly as she needed to be. By the time she reached the lobby, her phone vibrated once. Confirmed, Daniel texted. Funds frozen. Notifications will hit within minutes. Amelia stepped outside into the cold New York air. 3 minutes later, the emergency alerts began. Vanessa's phone rang first. Then Richard's. Then the CFO's tablet lit up with red banners and flashing warnings. Liquidity shortfall. Capital withdrawal. Expansion risk status downgraded from aggressive to unstable. Contracts flagged. Banks requesting immediate clarification. Inside the tower, confusion bloomed like a controlled fire gone wrong. Amelia walked down the street, heels clicking softly against concrete, her phone lighting up again and again in her coat pocket. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. She already knew what the alerts said. She had written the framework for them herself 2 years ago. Under a consultant's agreement Vanessa had skimmed and dismissed as operational fluff. By the time Richard realized what was happening, it would be too late to stop it, and by the time Vanessa realized who had done it, the game would no longer be about business. Amelia Roth smiled for the first time that day, not out of joy, not out of spite, but out of certainty. The kind that only comes when people finally underestimate the wrong person. Amelia Roth did not slow her pace when her father's name lit up her phone for the 3rd time. She crossed Madison Avenue with the crowd, just another woman wrapped in a neutral coat, blending into the rhythm of the city, while 42 floors above her the Roth International boardroom was dissolving into controlled panic. She could already imagine it, the CFO pacing near the windows, legal advisors whispering in tight circles, Vanessa standing too straight, refusing to let her smile break even as the numbers bled red. Amelia knew those numbers intimately. She had modeled their failure months ago, back when everyone assumed the expansion was inevitable and irreversible. Power, she had learned, rarely came from loud moves. It came from exits timed so precisely they felt like fate. Her phone finally stopped ringing and switched to vibrating alerts instead. Emails, texts, calendar requests marked urgent. She ignored them all and entered a quiet cafe she had frequented for years, a place where no one recognized the Roth name, and the barista never asked questions. She ordered the same black coffee she always did, and took a seat by the window, placing her phone face down on the table. Only when she had taken the first sip did she allow herself to think about the moment that had set everything in motion years ago, long before Vanessa's smirk in the boardroom, long before Richard's dismissive nod. Amelia had been 23 when she realized her role in the family business would never change. She had presented a risk analysis to her father late one evening, pointing out subtle inconsistencies in a proposed merger, warning of long-term exposure hidden beneath short-term gains. Richard had listened patiently, then smiled in that gentle, paternal way that felt more like a closed door than reassurance. "You see problems," he had said. "That's useful. But vision belongs to those willing to take risks." A week later, Vanessa was promoted. Amelia was thanked for her support. That night, Amelia stopped asking for permission. She started building quietly, using the skills no one credited her for: pattern recognition, behavioral finance, regulatory foresight. She advised startups under pseudonyms, took equity instead of applause, learned how capital really moved when no one was watching. She studied how family businesses collapse not because of enemies, but because of arrogance. Roth International, she realized, was not indestructible. It was simply unchallenged. The cafe door opened and closed again, snapping her back to the present. Her phone vibrated once more, this time with a message she had been expecting. "They're calling emergency session," Daniel wrote. "Vanessa's expansion partners are panicking. Banks are reassessing credit lines." Amelia typed back calmly, "Let them." Across the city, inside the Roth Tower, Vanessa had locked herself in a smaller conference room with Richard and the senior executives. The wall screen showed cascading notifications, each one worse than the last. The $85 million wasn't just money. It was leverage, reassurance, a silent guarantee that had allowed Vanessa to promise timelines and returns she could no longer support. Without it, the expansion wasn't ambitious. It was reckless. Who pulled the funding? Vanessa demanded, her voice sharp, eyes scanning the faces around her as if the culprit might confess under pressure. We're tracing it, the CFO said, sweat visible at his temples. It's routed through a private vehicle, clean structure, no immediate flags. Richard said nothing at first. He stared at the screen, jaw tight, his mind moving through possibilities. He had spent decades reading people, sensing threats before they materialized, and now, for the first time in years, he felt blindsided. Call Amelia, he said finally. She's not answering, Vanessa snapped. She left right after the meeting. Something in Richard's chest tightened. He remembered her expression as she walked out, neutral, almost serene, too calm for someone who had just been publicly dismissed. He had mistaken it for resignation. Now, doubt crept in, slow and unwelcome. Back at the cafe, Amelia finished her coffee and stood just as her phone rang again. This time she answered. Yes. Her voice was polite, distant. Amelia, Richard said, forcing steadiness into his tone. We're having complications. We need you back at the office. I'm unavailable, she replied simply. There was a pause. This is serious. I know, Amelia said. That's why I made my decision carefully. The silence on the other end deepened. Vanessa's voice cut in, sharp and incredulous. What decision? What are you talking about? Amelia closed her eyes briefly, then opened them, looking out at the city that had taught her everything her family never did. You told me to stick to my side jobs, she said calmly. This is one of them. Vanessa laughed, a brittle sound. Don't be ridiculous. Do you have any idea what's happening right now? Yes, Amelia said. Your expansion just lost its foundation. Richard's voice dropped. Did you do this? Amelia didn't rush her answer. I protected my investment. Your investment? Vanessa repeated. You don't have. I do, Amelia interrupted, still calm. $85 million worth. Structured quietly, exactly because I knew this day might come. The room on the other end erupted, voices overlapping, disbelief colliding with anger. Amelia listened without emotion. She had imagined this conversation countless times, rehearsed it not out of bitterness, but necessity. You humiliated me, Vanessa hissed. You undermined the company. No, Amelia replied, I exposed it. There's a difference. Richard spoke again, slower now, measured. You could have come to us. Amelia almost smiled. I did, for years. She ended the call before they could respond and stepped back onto the sidewalk, the cold air sharp against her skin. She knew this was only the beginning. The withdrawal would trigger investigations, partner defections, media whispers. Vanessa would fight back, publicly and viciously. Richard would try to regain control to contain the damage. And Amelia would remain exactly where she had always been, underestimated, watching ready. The emergency alerts had started the collapse. What came next would determine who survived it. By the next morning, the Roth name was trending in places it had never appeared before. Not in glossy business magazines or polite financial columns, but in rapid-fire analyst threads, encrypted investor chats, and quiet calls between banks that prided themselves on discretion. Amelia woke before sunrise in her apartment overlooking the East River, the city still half asleep, and checked the news without urgency. She had already mapped the sequence in her head. First came confusion, then speculation, then fear dressed up as concern. Roth International's communications team released a vague statement about temporary restructuring of capital commitments, but the market didn't speak corporate language, it spoke instinct, and instinct sensed blood. Amelia dressed simply and left her apartment, walking instead of calling a car. Movement helped her think. With every step, she replayed the invisible lines she had drawn years ago, connections that now began to glow faintly as they activated. The $85 million withdrawal was only the visible strike. Beneath it lay clauses, contingencies, quiet conversations with regulators who valued foresight, not loyalty. She had never aimed to destroy Roth International. She aimed to force it to tell the truth about itself. Inside the Roth Tower, Vanessa hadn't slept. She paced her office, heels abandoned, blazer thrown over a chair, eyes red but sharp. She had spent the night calling expansion partners, assuring them this was a temporary hiccup, promising revise, guarantees she hadn't yet secured. Every call ended the same way, with polite concern and non-committal answers. Confidence, she was learning, evaporated faster than capital, and behind every conversation loomed the same question she refused to ask out loud. How had Amelia done this without her knowing? Richard watched his daughter from across the room, seeing cracks he had never allowed himself to notice before. He had built his career on stability, on slow growth, and trusted relationships. Vanessa's rise had been exhilarating, a sign that the next generation could move faster, think bigger. Amelia's quiet presence had felt unnecessary by comparison. Now, in the chaos, Richard felt the weight of every decision that had sidelined one daughter while elevating the other. He wondered when exactly Amelia had stopped being a participant and become a counterbalance. Midday brought the first real blow. A major overseas partner formally paused negotiations, citing uncertainty in capital assurance. The message was clinical, devastating. Vanessa slammed her phone onto the desk, anger finally spilling past control. She planned this, she said, voice shaking. This isn't protection. This is revenge. Richard didn't answer immediately. He thought of Amelia as a child, sitting quietly in corners, absorbing everything, never demanding attention. He had mistaken that patience for dependence. Revenge requires emotion, he said slowly. This feels like preparation. That afternoon, Amelia sat across from Daniel Klein in a private office far from the Roth building, the kind of place where decisions were made without glass walls or family names. Daniel slid a tablet across the table, charts and timelines glowing softly. Media inquiries are increasing, he said. Some are circling your involvement. Amelia glanced at the screen, unimpressed. They won't connect it yet. They will, Daniel replied. Eventually, that's fine, she said. By then the narrative will have shifted. Daniel hesitated, then asked the question he had been holding back. Are you ready for them to know who you really are in this? Amelia leaned back, eyes steady. They've never known, she said. That's not changing. What's changing is who they're afraid of disappointing. As if summoned by the thought, Amelia's phone buzzed again. Vanessa's name flashed on the screen. Amelia let it ring twice before answering. What do you want? Vanessa demanded, skipping all pretense. Clarity, Amelia replied. For both of us. You're enjoying this, Vanessa snapped, watching everything I built wobble. Amelia's voice hardened for the first time. You built on assumptions. I built on math. You think you're smarter than everyone else? No, Amelia said. I think I paid attention when others didn't. There was a pause, heavy and charged. When Vanessa spoke again, her tone shifted, sharper but quieter. What do you want? Amelia looked out the window at the city she had learned to navigate without a name to protect her. I want Roth International to slow down, she said. To stop betting its future on applause. And I want a seat that isn't decorative. You already have one, Vanessa scoffed. A real one, Amelia corrected, with authority, transparency, accountability. And if we say no, Amelia didn't hesitate, then this will feel gentle compared to what comes next. The call ended without agreement, but something fundamental had changed. Vanessa wasn't dismissing her anymore. She was calculating her. That evening, a financial columnist published a speculative piece hinting at internal fractures within Roth International, suggesting that a silent stakeholder might be influencing recent disruptions. The article didn't name Amelia, but she recognized the shape of it. The world was beginning to notice the absence of noise where noise was expected. Richard read the article alone in his office, long after everyone else had left. He thought of legacy not as something inherited, but something protected. For the first time, he wondered whether the future of the company depended not on the daughter who spoke the loudest, but on the one who had learned how to move unseen. And Amelia, standing on her balcony as the city lights flickered on below, allowed herself one slow breath of satisfaction. Not victory. Not yet. This was leverage, and leverage, she knew, was only valuable if you knew exactly when to apply pressure. The final collapse did not come with an explosion. It came quietly, the way real power shifts always do, through signatures, silence, and decisions made behind closed doors. Roth International announced an emergency restructuring within 48 hours of the capital withdrawal, but by then the narrative had already escaped them. Investors no longer asked whether the expansion would succeed, they asked who inside the company had lost control. The media stopped treating it as a temporary disruption and began framing it as a reckoning. Amelia watched it unfold from a distance, not because she was afraid to be seen, but because distance allowed her to see everything clearly. Vanessa tried to fight it the only way she knew how: louder meetings, sharper statements, relentless pressure on advisors to fix what she still believed was a sabotage rather than a correction. But the harder she pushed, the more resistance she met. Partners delayed. Executives hesitated. Confidence, once fractured, refused to be bullied back into place. And every path Vanessa took led her back to the same reality. Amelia Roth had leverage she could not outmaneuver. The final board meeting was called on a gray morning, the kind where the city felt heavy, as if it sensed an ending. Amelia arrived early, as she always did, wearing the same quiet confidence, carrying no documents except a slim folder she placed in front of her seat. When Vanessa entered, their eyes met for the first time without hostility, only calculation. Richard took his place at the head of the table, visibly older than he had been just days before. Legacy had weight, and for the first time, it pressed down on him instead of lifting him up. The discussion was brief, stripped of theatrics. Numbers were presented, risks acknowledged, the truth laid bare. When the floor opened, Richard turned not to Vanessa but to Amelia. "You understood this before any of us," he said, his voice steady but subdued. "You saw where we were heading." Amelia didn't argue. "I prepared for it," she replied. "There's a difference." Vanessa exhaled sharply, then spoke, her voice lower than anyone had ever heard it. "You could have destroyed us." "I could have," Amelia said. "I didn't." "That should tell you everything." The vote was unanimous. Governance was restructured, authority redistributed. Amelia was no longer an observer, no longer a silent shareholder tucked neatly into the margins. She was appointed Chief Strategic Director, with full oversight over capital deployment and long-term risk. Vanessa retained her position, but not her unchecked power. The room did not applaud. It didn't need to. Power doesn't announce itself when it finally arrives. After the meeting, Richard asked Amelia to stay behind. The office felt smaller without the weight of the board present. "I was wrong," he said quietly. "About you, about what strength looks like." Amelia met his gaze, not unkindly. "You weren't wrong," she said. "You were just listening to the wrong kind of noise." He nodded, accepting the truth without defense. That, more than the title, felt like closure. Weeks later, Roth International stabilized, not faster, not louder, but smarter. The expansion was restructured, scaled, salvaged in a form that could survive scrutiny. The media moved on, hungry for the next crisis. Vanessa learned restraint the hard way, and Amelia learned that power didn't require forgiveness to function. They worked together, not as equals in affection, but as counterparts in necessity. On a quiet evening, Amelia stood alone on her balcony once more, the city glowing beneath her like a living organism. Her phone buzzed with a final message from Daniel. "You won." Amelia typed back after a moment. "No, I positioned myself." She slipped the phone into her pocket and looked out at the horizon, knowing something she had always known. The most dangerous people are never the loudest in the room. They are the ones taking notes, waiting, building worlds inside worlds until the moment comes when silence is no longer weakness but authority. And this time, when the emergency alert started, they were no longer warnings. They were confirmations. Times. The most dangerous person in the room is the one no one listens to. Amelia Roth was never loud, never celebrated, never chosen, but she was always watching. While others chased power, she built it in silence. This story isn't about revenge. It's about timing, patience, and knowing your worth before the world recognizes it. If you've ever been underestimated, ignored, or told to stay in your place, remember this silence is not weakness, it's preparation. And when the moment comes, power doesn't ask for permission. It takes its place.